Hi, my name is Lawrence. My name is Lane. Thanks, Lane. You got a job for me? That's not networking.
I'm going to go super hard for some amount of months and then I'm going to make it. That is never the case.
And at that point, I'm officially ready to apply to this kind of job and they're going to hire me. Lie.
At long last, I am joined by Lawrence Lockhart. Lawrence, I've seen you around on Twitter for honestly a couple of years now, and I'm super excited to have you on.
I'm excited to be here. And when you say couple of years, hopefully you mean that definitively and not figuratively, like you've been on Twitter forever, because I am still very new to this game and feeling my way around. But glad to be here, man. Thanks for having me, Lane.
It feels like you can't be that new. I mean, I really started getting involved with tech Twitter maybe 18 months to 2 years ago. When did you start making noise online?
Still not sure if I'm making noise. However, I think my name began to be spread around a little bit more, probably in the 2 to 3 years ago mark. But
Okay.
literally, I just got started in tech like 6 years ago. So all of this is brand new for me. I have an entire life, which has been told so many times. Hopefully we won't get too deep into that. Like I have an entire life before my tech life. And so this is like a round 2 or maybe even a round 3 for me. But yeah,
round 3 in the career game.
Years getting really, really noisy. I think once Clubhouse, the tech people ran from Clubhouse and they ran to Twitter, and Twitter saw them running to Twitter, and they were like, hey, let's make a vehicle for them that's kind of like Clubhouse and call it Spaces. And Spaces has an interesting way of magnifying whatever you say, whether it makes sense or not. So hopefully the things that you researched on me made sense. But yeah, last 2 or 3 years, things have gotten a little noisy. And but even as I shared earlier, like it hasn't been so much noisy about me and my brand, but trying to help others believe who are trying to make this trek, kind of trying to cross this journey of regular blue collar job into one of those tech people. And sometimes just the representation and seeing the faces and hearing the voices helps a lot. I know it would have helped me back in the day.
Yeah, that's a story that I'm really excited for this conversation, because I kind of talk about this podcast as, hey, we're going to talk about backend development and we're going to talk about careers, like ways to get into backend development. But if a good number of the career related podcasts we've done in the past, for example, James Q Quick was a great one. But
that's my guy. That's my guy, right? Not to interrupt, but that's my guy.
I did know you guys are you from the same geographical area as
we
James?
are the great. Well, I am now. Like where I'm from is a whole story. We might get into that. We might not have time, but currently I'm in the greater Memphis metropolitan area. James is in Memphis proper. And so when I'll give you the short version so we get the bigger things. But when I first began going to meetups, when I was just up in the loft, studying on my own, just plugging away at free code camp and endless Udemy courses. And I finally decided to put myself out there. I drove to Memphis and came to a place called Code Connector, which was an in-person meetup. And I was greeted by some very welcoming, warm, intelligent, awesome people, one of whom is named Ted Patterson, who is the founder of Code Connector. The other one was named James Q Quick. So he's literally one of the first faces I ever saw in tech. And somehow we've just kind of been close ever since. He ended up becoming my bootcamp teacher later. Fun fact, Danny Thompson and I both attended the same bootcamp at the same time under James. So that's like sensei. And then also,
I didn't know that.
Yes, it's a small world here in Memphis, especially in tech. We all know each other. So once you just dip your toes in, you're in. Like it's an easy club to get into. But he ended up also becoming a person who would refer me to his actual team at FedEx, which is where I got a lot of my my back end chops in the Java world. So we've been real close and still have a lot of love for him. And he's never shown anything but the kind of character that he showed for you, on your podcast recently. So big shout out to James Quick. Back to you, Lane.
No, that's incredible. I didn't realize that lore there. I'm trying to get Danny to also come on the podcast at some point. We'll get him eventually.
We'll get him eventually. Big things happening with Danny. Big things. Oh, so excited for him.
Yeah, he's a busy guy. But the reason this conversation is particularly interesting to me is James and I have a similar background, at least in the hand wavy sense that we both got CS degrees, and then we had this I'd consider it kind of a more normal transition into tech. I don't think we've covered on this podcast yet kind of the transition that you had working correct me if I'm wrong, blue collar job, and then moving into tech later in life. Can you give us that like high level overview? Like you said, we don't have to go into like all the details of the backstory, but maybe
Yeah.
just to like set the
And I don't
stage.
want to deprive your listeners, but I think I've told that story so many times. People are getting tired of it. Like, does he have anything else to say? And I promise I do. So just check another podcast or tweet or my TikTok. You will hear the story. But the big picture for me, and so everybody's story is an individual path, right? The big picture for me is when I was given the opportunity to do the traditional path, right? I blew it. I just blew it. Like not focused, not a study, not like I didn't have good study patterns, none of that. And that's why I just kind of stumbled into hospitality, restaurant management, right? Because that's one of the things when you don't have marketable skills. It's going to be the restaurants, retail, like logistics. Like there's just certain things you just end up doing when you don't have marketable skills. And so years later, fast forward the tape, it's like, let me give it one more shot and just do it on my own. Now, you're going to have to still learn the skills because you have to be competitive with the people coming out of CS programs, right? You might not have to learn liberal arts, or I may or may not need, linear algebra for my very first job in tech. But generally speaking, that's still the level of competition. So you still have to learn the skills. And that's where it goes from being an interesting idea to, oh, this is a marathon. And that's where I try to catch people in a lot of my mentorship who are struggling, right? Like, what is the struggle? We try to ask the clarifying questions to find out what's going on with them. And oftentimes it's the fact that they face with, oh, this is a freaking marathon up a mountain. Like, even when they call it boot camp, like we use the word boot camp for a reason. That's military language. Like, this is designed to take you from a civilian and turn you into something else. So a
Yeah.
self-taught journey is a real marathon. It's a marathon up a mountain. And so it's really important that a person is as clear as possible on their destination in terms of like a job role or at least a field, because you don't want to waste time going up one mountain for 6, 9, 12 months just to find out you're on the wrong mountain for your personal interests.
Yeah.
And I did that. I did that multiple times. And even when I literally remember learning HTML and CSS and being so happy, then hitting JavaScript and being so sad. And then even
That's
realize
the, yeah.
you didn't realize for months, oh, you're now about to start learning computer science fundamentals, because
Yeah.
HTML gives me some structure for a web page. That's fine. CSS scripting for designing. Okay. But I need to learn some actual computer science fundamentals, which are based on math principles at the end of the day. And you've had none of that, not successfully. Like I dibble dabbled in college. Like, there's classes I passed, there's classes I failed. I didn't finish until much, much later with a general business degree. But you're faced
Okay.
with a new set of learnings, and it can be really, really challenging. So for me, again, fast forwarding the tape, it was like a 2.5 year off and on journey lane where I was believing and I was working and I'm pumping out assignments and doing little mini projects, then hitting something just so seemingly insurmountable and not really
Yeah.
having that community element. So again, this is prior to the fun joining the community and going to meetup part. This is just me in the loft.
Okay.
And I'm
Yeah.
working, 40, 50, 60, 70. I'm the GM of my restaurant. I work all the time. I work when I'm off. Literally, like if you're a GM of a
Yeah.
fast food joint and, somebody calls off and you're about to have your grill go down, you're working. So I'm
Yeah.
doing that and then coming home beat, hitting the coffee. Shout out to Auth Zero back when James used to work there, hitting the coffee and staying
Nice.
up till 3, 4 in the morning, right? Just to get through for loops or switch statements or whatever else the thing is. And it wasn't fun. It wasn't fun. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't Instagrammable. I like to talk about that a lot of times. I think that might actually have hurt my personality. I'm hurt my image sometimes on TikTok because I like to keep it real. It's not
Yeah.
this ideal, super pretty backdrop and you have your latte and your iPad. Like the path to that is a long, torturous path. And I think for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be producing software, at the end of the day, I like the way Chris Langsdorff said it the other day. We're dot manipulators, right? We're glorified dot manipulators. I love how he said that. But sometimes these systems actually are critical, right? It might be with supply chain or healthcare, things like that. And so there's a lot to learn. It's possible you have to be just willing to put in the work. And so eventually, I'm very happy I got to the point where I was completing enough projects and had enough of a decent portfolio to get someone to look at me twice and just give me a chance at an interview. That was Blake Howard. Gave me my first chance. I have to remember his name. He was VP of marketing for Fred's Dollar Store. Anybody down from the South remember Fred's back before they went bankrupt? 9 months after me working there. That was a lot. Yeah. My
But
first
that
tech
wasn't
job.
the reason. It was entirely
No,
unrelated.
not at all. Like day one, I'm so happy and I'm Facebooking and Twittering. Like, I got my first tech job. Oh yeah. 9 months later, I'm unemployed. Way
God.
before the layoffs. But
Yeah.
yeah, give me my first chance as like a web content developer guy. I was the only developer on the marketing team. Just kept the website up, but my foot was in the door. That was the big thing.
Yeah.
And just getting your foot in the door puts you on, like, not on easy street. It's still a different, but still a mountain, but it's a less steep mountain. Like, you're in the
Yeah.
circle now, right? You're interacting with other people who can advise you if you're willing to talk to them and interact and be a decent person. Like my mantra for everything: start with being a decent person. So that was really
Yeah.
cool. Really, really cool.
2.5 years. This is a really interesting point. And now your TikToks are going to come back to haunt you because that's where I did all my research.
They're
Went
out
back
there.
through the timeline.
They're out there.
I'm just kidding. It's so good. Anyone who's listening to this, definitely follow Lawrence on, I mean, all the places. But I happened to be poking through the YouTube Shorts and the TikToks. You had this one video. In fact, I wrote it down, so I want to make sure I don't
Got me
get
on
it totally
pins and
wrong. But
needles over here, man. What did I say?
no, the basic idea is like you had this video that talks about this idea of like 6 months is not the standard anymore, right? Which I completely agree with in terms of how long it's going to take to get into this industry. And I think in 2020 and 2021, like this was an idea that a lot of people were getting behind. Like, man, it's so easy to get into tech. You barely have to do anything. Just learn a bit of HTML and CSS. And I think the tech recession has maybe reset a lot of our heads around like actually how hard it can be to get into this industry. So it was interesting to hear. Did you say it took you roughly 2.5 years?
It did. And so that's not 2.5 years of applying. That's from literally opening my very first Git repo on my very first course. I think it was something called, oh God, level 9, or I don't know what it was. I was learning Ruby for some reason and that didn't work out. But from the very
Yeah.
first lesson to hire was about 2.5 years. And so that includes learning, that includes applying, that includes starting and stopping, like completely stopping at least 3 times. Like, forget this. This is too hard. I'm too tired. I'm not effective at work. They're going to fire me and I'm still not ready for my tech job. I'm going to be unemployed. And I would just walk away from it for like a month or more. And then
Yeah.
something in the back of my head was like, but you can't keep flipping burgers, dude. You can't do this till you're 65 or 70. You're going to end up in Walmart, which is not a problem, but not what I wanted to do. You have to get
Right.
back on it. So I jumped on and off the horse multiple times. It was not a straight path. Like, I'm just Superman. I just learned everything and then I got hired. Mine was a really rocky journey. And I like that fact. So when I talk to mentors, right? When I talk to mentees or mentors, doesn't matter. But they're looking for their path and trying to figure out and assess and compare. I'm like, look, your path is your path. And so, yeah, 6 months isn't the standard. There is no standard. Your time is your time. Now, if you're not okay with that, then maybe try something else, because there is no, hey, 6 months, do this, that you're going to be in. Particularly not now, with the level of competition being what it is, from the flood of candidates that is abnormally large for every level, to the point where people are literally accepting down leveling just to stay employed in some cases. Like, not everyone who works in FANG is ready to retire tomorrow. Some need to keep working. And if I'm an L5 and there's no L5s hiring, I'll take an L4 to keep getting a check, right? And that's happening, which means if you have successive down leveling, well, what's happening to the juniors? It's really, really tough. It's still possible, but really, really, really tough. And so clear expectations for yourself can end a lot, or at least, hold off a lot of frustration down the road.
I think something that can make the discussion around like, how long it's going to take really hard is everybody wants to hear when you have this like huge burst of motivation to like get into tech, right? When you're first getting excited about it, it's like, okay, how long is it going to take? And the assumption is like, I'm going to go super hard for like, some amount of months, and then I'm going to make it, right? Like you said, 6 months, 9 months, whatever it is. But my reality, like having worked with
story.
having worked with tons of students, that is like never the case. It's always this on and off, and they have a full-time job and they have family and they have kids. And it just like, maybe if you're Superman and you could like streamline the whole thing, but the reality is just that nobody does that. And so it takes quite a bit longer in many cases.
Now I do know, so this be fully transparent. I do know of some people who are able to do career transitions that do more leveraging of their existing skills. So maybe they're in some role that looks just like PM, but it's not called PM. But they do all the things that a PM would do. It might be an operations manager or something else in some other field. And they're able to leverage those prior experiences with a connection and make a much faster transition. That wasn't the path for me. So there's two ways to transition when you're trying to transition out of an old career to a new one. You can leverage existing skills or learn new ones. So my path was learning brand new things. I didn't do any programming flipping burgers. So I had to learn an entire new, not skill, but set of skills, then be able to demonstrate that enough to get somebody to trust me to mess around with their code. That's a different story from a person who is already doing the thing that they want to do. They're just not in tech. So they're able to position, to massage resume, and I always have to add the and, leverage existing connections in order to make that move. And that can happen. For some people, that makes more sense. I just wanted to code. I wanted to program. I wanted to be that nerd. I wanted to be the person who sees the forest for the trees. Shout out to, I had to find a Backend shirt to honor you. So this is my Splunk t-shirt. That's why I'm wearing the Splunk. Which I guess I'm a merch mismatch because this is Splunk and this is Google, and I have no affiliation with Google. It's just a bad hair day. But yeah, this is my Backend shirt.
You're repping it for Kelsey Hightower, I think. Is he still at Google?
No. Oh my gosh. Throw his head at you. No, Kelsey retired. Man.
Oh, that's right. Dead. I did see that news actually.
And he gave his.
I followed him for a long time, but
yeah, he gave his huge grand closing talk at the Render ATL conference just last month, of which I did attend and was on the front row, laughing and crying and just listening to him tell his tech life story in a way that I've never heard before. And I've listened to a lot of Kelsey. I listened to some Python Kelsey, some Kubernetes Kelsey, some Google Cloud Kelsey. This story I've never heard, and it touched in a really special way. So you had to be there. I don't even think it was recorded, but he's no longer at Google.
Okay.
He works for Kelsey now, and we'll see what the future brings. Matter of fact, he made a big announcement about it. Everybody was like, "What?" I think that was last summer.
Yeah, I'm only familiar with him kind of tangentially through the stuff he's written and done in regard to Kubernetes. That's my exposure. But
my first direct exposure we actually had back when I worked at FedEx, and they were looking at cloud options. They had a Google Cloud Day, and I don't know where they found all this equipment, but they transformed like the majority of one of our main buildings of our their corporate offices to look like Google. Like we had look like Google I/O. Like they had all these struts and all these booth setups, and he spoke like twice. He spoke once for the introductory part, and then he did the Kelsey show with the live coding and took Q&A, which is really, really, really cool. So that was my exposure to him up close. And so cool years later to see him now, having done his thing at Google and made his mark. Now he's chilling where we all want to get.
Yeah, I mean, he's doing well. He's he does a great job. Okay, so one thing I'm particularly interested in is I've talked to a lot of people on this show who come from like their work experience has been more centered in what I would call like I don't know, tech companies, I guess. Like where the product is technology, right? So SaaS companies like Stripe or Facebook or Google or whatever. I was doing some research, and I'm still not 100% sure. Have you done a lot of work in what I would consider like IT and dev jobs for companies that are not necessarily tech companies?
The company I work for right now is the first time. So we'll walk through that. And
let's talk about
that. I think I'll answer the question you were going to ask after that as well. So right now, and we'll work backwards. So right now I work at a company called Backend. Love this company. They are a Java shop through and through based out of Finland, and we build web solutions for Java developers and teams, period. We're not trying to market to everybody or everything. We have some amazing full stack web solutions, components, tooling, AIs, code assistants, specifically to make Java developers and teams more productive than ever. Love this company. I'm a DevRel for them. Been here since August. So coming up to my 1-year anniversary. We make software. This is my first time dealing in that kind of environment. Before that, 4+ years at FedEx. And FedEx employs a gazillion developers, but it's a logistics company. We move, I keep saying we. There's a part of me that's at all the places I've ever worked. So if I say me, we, it's nothing funny. I'm not at FedEx. But they push boxes around for a living. That's their job. Make boxes go around the world faster than anybody else. 10:30 a.m. guarantee. There's no one else that does that. That's what they do. They move boxes. But there's technology in every single company. And before that, I mentioned already, I worked for Fred's for 1 year. So that was the retail chain. So 1 year at a retail firm, 4 years at a logistics supply company. And the question would be why? Like, why them? That's where I could show up the most competitive and also work in an environment that felt the most familiar. So, fun fact about FedEx, besides the fact that it's humongous, when I left, there's like 500,000 global employees, like 500,000
Holy
people for
cow.
FedEx. Out of all the opcos, FedEx Services, FedEx Express, FedEx Ground, 500,000 people. And it's a very traditional, old school kind of company, almost government like kind of
Mm.
rigid, kind of Gen X / boomer. Fun fact, I'm not 22. I know I'm skin looking good, got the beard mustache trimmed. I'm not 22. I'm not 25 fresh out of college. I'm later in life. I already told you earlier, I have an entire life, 17 years of restaurant management before tech
Yeah.
and 5 years of supply chain working in a warehouse in Nissan in Canton, Mississippi. So 22
Wow.
years of experience before I ever looked in tech. So where can I show up on day one as a brand new front end developer and feel comfortable and feel like I'm going to be listened to
Not
and feel like
Google, right?
it's probably not Google. I could have
Yeah.
gone for that, but the mismatch. When we talk about ageism, it's not only from corporate to you; it's you to your environment. Where can you feel the best so that you can give your best? And so, yeah,
Yeah.
Threads is kind of an old
And
school place like that. Lots of middle aged folks, lots of boomers. FedEx, very much a place like that. Lots of Gen X folks, tons of boomers. And that 5 years gave me enough tech chops where now I could pretty much go and be whatever because I know my stuff. But that
yeah.
wasn't the day one experience. And so I think if I would have
Right.
tried to gone for like a Vaadin or any other kind of software producing company or technology producing company for day one, even if I got in, my suspicion is I wouldn't have felt as good as I did in the other environments, and my productivity would not have been what it was. And so the
Yeah.
path after might be, yeah, so I'm going back to restaurants and I'm going to start my business and screw tech and tech interviews are broken. Like that's when all the excuses come up. But was it
Yeah.
all the other side? How much of it was you? That's a huge part of maturity, man, is just learning how much of any given situation that doesn't feel good, how much of that do you own? And
Yeah.
are you willing to claim even more parts of that? Like how much more of this can I claim for myself that I can now fix? That's a huge part of maturity. The easy thing is to make sure, like if this is the problem, if that's the problem, right? Let me make that much is going to be you, and that much is me. That's what we all do.
Yeah.
You did
Yeah.
this and they did that, and the man did this and the corporation did that. But when you can move this line over, which is not easy, but it's a maturity step, you give yourself the opportunity to fix more things. And
Yeah.
that's what I've done. That's what I've done. And so I found
And
environments that made sense for my culture, made sense for my age, generation, and all the other goofy stuff, which gave
yeah.
me like training ground time to get where I am now, where I feel like I can flourish anywhere. And I'm having no problem saying I've had offers, at least to interview, from everywhere. It's like, wow, I'm actually here now. Like I can
That's
kind of do
incredible.
whatever. Like the age doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I want to be clear. Like when I said, probably not Google, it's not like I definitely don't want to make it sound like I'm saying there's no way you could have worked at Google. It's
Mm-hmm.
but there's something to be said about maximizing your chances, right? Like you
Mm.
said about going somewhere where you feel comfortable, going somewhere where maybe you have connections, or are you working like geographically close to where you actually live, like, or
I work
did you have to
remote.
go
I work
remote to
here.
work?
Our company is based in Finland, so
Or sorry, I meant at FedEx when you first got that job.
yes. So I was in the Memphis area already, and FedEx headquarters is here. We have two main headquarters. There's one that's more like the sales, business, and corporate side. Then they have a whole another campus, whole
Yeah,
another campus. That's the tech side, just huge, almost size of a college campus. And I work there. But yeah, it's 40 minute commute. But yeah, still local, which is something I
yeah,
always emphasize to my mentees who are self-taught devs. Go for local market and go for in person. That's just your highest probability of just getting somebody to pay attention to you, first of all. When you
yeah,
go remote, especially if you go globally remote, oh, I'm going for a job in Australia. Where do you live? Colorado. Dude, you're competing against the entire world. You can go for it. Somebody's going to land the job, but increase your chances for that first role. Put
yes,
everything that you have in your power in your favor. Local role, there's a chance that I can either know someone there, or if I, like I said earlier, start getting out the house, going to meetups, conferences, open houses, I can meet someone, build a relationship, gain trust, and then ask for a referral down the road, right? Because that's the
Yeah.
sequence. I think we've kind of messed up the networking thing. Networking. Hi, my name is Lawrence. My name is Lane. Thanks, Lane. You got a job for me? That's not networking.
Yeah.
That's pissing people off. And it's happening on Twitter. It's happening. Trust me.
Yeah, that's cold DMs and it's a nightmare.
That's bad. It's hi, my name is Lawrence. Hi, my name is Lane. What are you into? Blah blah blah. What are you into? Blah blah blah. Cool. Talk to you sometimes. Then a couple of days we talk. And then we talk. And one or two things are going to happen. We're going to vibe or we're not. If we do,
Yeah.
I can continue the conversation to a point where eventually one or the other is willing to trust the other person enough to be able to offer something. I don't feel like an offer was going to hurt me. And so
Right.
that's the networking thing. And your best opportunity to do that is always going to be right there where you live, right? Your local sandbox. Play with the kids in your sandbox. Same thing goes
Yeah.
for tech choices. Who's in your sandbox? Same thing goes for open source. Find people who are playing with some code that you like and go play with them. It's not like mystery. Find your sandbox and go play.
It's so cool to hear you say that your first job was local. My first job was also local. In fact, I had that job. I grew up in a small town in southern Utah, and I had a job, local part-time programming job, actually, for about a year before I moved to do, another on-site job, but it was kind of in the Salt Lake area. And I got into programming for a lot of reasons. I always had in the back of my mind this benefit of like, maybe someday I'll be able to work remote. And like I do work remote now. It sounds like you do too, which is fantastic.
Yes.
But I worry that there's still a lot of people getting into the career with like the requirement that like my first job has to be remote. Like I'm doing this solely so I can work from home. And I think that makes it really hard.
There's nothing wrong with a remote job as a first job if you are as self-directed as required to be able to get through those initial humps, right? You don't know what it's like being in that first tech job until you worked it. You really don't. If I would imagine, even in my life, 6 years ago, my first tech job, I was here, I probably wouldn't be here now. You need support. You really need support. You need a person you can grab, quicker than a Slack message and you're hoping they respond back, or a Teams message. You need that support. And it's not to discourage anyone out there. I'm sure a lot of people see this, but that support is useful. There's a point to it, and there's a point to be able to build, again, the trust factor with folks. I don't care if it's lunch or, walking around the cube or the open office or the coffee machine. There's a benefit in that relationship, that in-person relationship building, that I don't think can be replaced in remote. But yes, if you just do a basic scan, right? We always talk about the numbers. If you do just a basic scan on LinkedIn, Indeed, Monster, or whatever favorite job board you have, and just do a comparison, that'll be a good personal project for a beginner. Do a comparison for your tech stack of choice. How many remote jobs are there versus hybrid versus in person? The vast majority are going to be hybrid and in person. There's a small minority that's only remote. So if your thought process is, I'm going into tech to go remote, what you're saying is, I'm going into tech to go for the smallest chance section of jobs. Which is just a choice. It's not a bad choice. It's just a choice. The problem is doing that choice and not being cognizant of it. Just know what you're going for. I'm going for the smallest sector. The largest sector of job is either hybrid or in person. So if you want to give yourself better chances, well, I've been interviewing for 3 months, for 6 months, I've been applying for a year. Go for where your numbers are in your favor. Then once you get your wings underneath you, get your air underneath your wings, you got your chops, you call your own shots down the road. There's a difference in the midlife to senior career path and strategy to the entry path and strategy. They're completely different worlds, which is why I always say when people give advice, understand the perspective of where they are in their career and how, like, what makes sense for them, and then how does that relate to you?
Cool. So you have this video where you talk about learning with a purpose as opposed to kind of just learning random things, I suppose. And I think this is something that in particular, well, let me back up. When you're in college, when you're in university, you have this curriculum laid out for you, right? You do this class, you do this class, you do this class, all the way up until you graduate, at which point you start looking for jobs. And not to say that it's so easy to get into the industry even with a degree, but you kind of have this, at least this linear or somewhat linear education path. What's your advice to people who are not necessarily struggling with being distracted? Like they're dedicated every day, they're learning, but like they're not necessarily learning in a single direction towards maybe like a career goal.
Yeah, that's I face that all the time. not me personally, but talking to interacting with people. And I always think back to, I didn't teach a boot camp, but I was a TA for a boot camp called Launch Code for 3 separate cohorts. And there's one particular cohort, and probably my most talented student in my group. We had maybe, I don't know, 10 to 12 people in my little group out of the big camp, right? The most talented one, the one who had the most skills, was just literally by the end, they were like the assistant to the TA. Like they were teaching other students like coding.
Yeah.
It took them the longest to get their job because
Wow.
their interests and their pursuits were so wide. It was very challenging for an employer to identify what are you actually great at and what are you
Mm.
actually interested in going hard in. And so
Yeah.
I had a mentee. So that was years ago, right? So that person will never see this. But anyway, that was years ago. But just recently, I had a mentee who talked to me, and she's enrolled in college. She's going, I think her major was biotechnology, something with bio, like the biology side of things. But
Okay.
she has background in ServiceNow and cloud, but she's interested in being a programmer. She's like, what's your advice? I'm like, figure out what you want to do with your life. That's that's not something I can help you with, right?
Yeah.
Stephen
Yeah.
Covey's begin with the end in mind is purposeful. It's purposeful. It's for you not to be single-minded in terms of your interests, but I can't even talk. Single-minded in terms of your pursuit. And so, like you said,
Mm.
a linear path or progression. I always used to say it on Twitter Spaces, your learning should be like steps. Like I'm trying to get to the third floor. I'm on the first floor. What steps are most likely to get me the first or the third? The
Yeah.
most likely, right? Most probable. Again, put the numbers in your favor. So if I know absolutely no programming, let's say I want to be a front end web developer, whether you use roadmaps.sh or just your favorite YouTuber, there's pretty clear steps about what you need to get into to maximize your chances of being able to present yourself as a competent front end developer. There are a wide
Yeah.
variety of tech things that are related that don't get you there. They just don't get you there. They might be fun. They might be interesting. They might be cool to talk about. They might be what's popping on tech Twitter or some other forum, but they're not going to get you there. Pursue what you want to. But
Yeah.
yeah, learn things in a sequence. Learn things that are going to get you to the next step, most likely. And it's interesting you mentioned college because even when I think about college, there are like any college degree, you're going to take a pretty wide variety of courses. You don't just learn front end or back end. Like
Yeah.
you take a wide variety of courses. But I think the difference in a collegiate person's path and a self-taught person's path is, for one, your deeper technical courses in college, you have a basis of mathematics and science that kind of ties all that together. Even if you don't think about it every day consciously, it's back there. So if you do
Yeah.
Cal 1, Cal 2, Cal 3, linear algebra, stats, I'm thinking about all the courses I've failed, linear algebra, stats, Q, physics 1, physics 2, chem 1, chem 2. You have a rigorous math and science background on which you can now tie all the things you learned. So you might take an AI elective, a cloud engineering requirement, Java 1, 2, Python, a wide variety of things that I would never suggest a self-taught person do because they don't have that math glue. That
Mm.
math and science have purpose. And for everyone who's like just no degrees, no college, you're missing. There's some things you don't understand. All of this boils down to math and science. All of it. I don't care if it's just manipulating a pixel and turning it from black to green. It all comes down to math and science. And so having that rigorous curriculum in college gives you like that foundational glue on which you can build a lot of things, which is why a college graduate can walk right into a junior cloud role or junior web dev role, software engineering generalist role, like a lot of different roles, pitting their own skill sets. You're more than likely not going to do that as a self-taught person. So you need to be more directed, like, here's the thing that I'm going after. And so let me find out what are the steps to that thing, learn those, be able to demonstrate them, connect with someone who needs to hear my message, and then go for that. That's my 3 E's, by the
Yeah.
way. I'm going to go ahead and plug my 3 E's to getting a tech job today is education, experience, and engagement with other people. I think this is a good segue for that. And I did want to
I
make
like
sure
that.
I
Yeah.
get that in this podcast. You have to teach yourself the skills for whatever that role is, which means you start with knowing what your role is. It can't be I like Web3 and this and that, and not as a self-taught person. You don't have that flexibility. You have to show a single-mindedness of purpose, study, and experience. So you go for those skills. Then you have to figure out, how do I demonstrate those skills at a level of competence, like I said earlier, to get somebody to trust me with their code. That's a big trust factor. So it can be the personal projects that are deployed. right? One click, I can see what you can do. It can be on the game store. It can be you want a hackathon. It can be open source. It can be some freelance clients you got. Something real, something
Yeah.
tangible, something I can put my hands on and say, oh, you have code in the wild. Never mind the fact that you're a cashier at Taco Bell. I don't care about that. You have code in the wild. I see it and it works. And I go on your LinkedIn and I can see a progression of posts where you've been learning. I scroll down, I see the freelance clients you got to give you a recommendation. You look like a tech person. I'm going to give you a shot. But now the person saying that needs to be somebody you're connected with. The third E, engagement with other people. You got to connect with people. You mentioned James Quick. He spoke at Render ATL as well. One of the things he said toward the end is that this is a day and time, as a beginner in particular, you should even apply somewhere you don't know people. Just don't even waste your time.
Mm.
You have to make that connection. It's not even the level up anymore. It's like the bare minimum, like the cost of entry. You've got to meet the people, which means you have to expose yourself in some way or another. If you're not a social person, social media person, you think that's cringe, no problem. Go to the meetups, go to the conferences. Like I said, tech companies have open houses sometimes. You can go and just shake hands and I'm a programmer. It might not even be the person presenting. It might be somebody just in the audience and you can introduce yourself. But you have to expose you and your brand to someone in order to get that level of relatability and hopefully get your resume seen. Otherwise, it becomes like 1 out of 1,000. Getting from the
Yeah.
bottom of the pile to the top of the pile is a challenge in itself.
There's an interesting point you made there. And I think if to some listeners, it will sound like a contradiction of a point I've made earlier, but I want to dig in on it and kind of get your take because I think there's something here. So we talked about how you want to begin with the end in mind, right? You want to know specifically as a self-taught learner what kind of job you're going after. And maybe it's even useful, like if you know that you want to be a backend developer at Stripe, go to Stripe, look at a job description, right? Reverse engineer from there. Like what are the things they're looking for? And you can kind of like, you can get this more focused path. But there's this other thing that I say, which is I don't think you should be trying to min-max. Min-max is like, this gaming term for like trying to minimize your path from where you're at to where you're going. It could be detrimental to learning. It can, stop you from exploring the space and becoming a more well-rounded developer. And I'm curious to get your take on that because it's like it sounds like it could be contradictory, but in my mind, it's actually not. It's like you should be taking your time. You should be becoming more well-rounded, learning things that aren't necessarily absolutely required for that job, but at the same time having direction and actually moving towards a single place.
Yeah, that's challenging. That's challenging because we could talk about, T-shaped models of skill sets and learning and other
Yeah.
models. It's all related. And if all I know, let's just say, for instance, all I know is backend and I have zero idea how the front end works, I'm not going to be a very effective backend developer. I have to
Right.
communicate with them. I have to. And if I'm building applications that are going to be deployed somewhere, I have to know at least enough about just deployment in general. Like, what is a container? What problem is that solving? Why are we using Docker as opposed to something else? Why are we using a non-relational database over relational or vice versa? I need to know at least enough around the ecosystem of wherever I plant myself for the purpose of being able to talk to cross-functional teams, because you're not going to be a silo working for yourself, just you and your crew, head down, do your code, end. It doesn't work that way, right? You have to interact with other teams. And so I would say deep on the core requirements, right? Whatever that is, whatever your thing is. But yes, learn in the process of learning those skills. Who will I talk to? I got to talk to the PM. They're the agile person. What's agile? Right? I don't have to do 3 agile certs, but I need to know something about agile because most companies these days are either agile or agile-like, for better or worse. It's just the truth. And if I'm on the programming side, who does a programmer talk to? Who do programming teams talk to? It's just like the software we build. Talk about backend. Okay, there's a backend language. It's server side. There's requests and responses. There's a database over here. Those have to interact. How do they interact? Well, if I'm on the server side, if I'm a Python guy or gal, and I have to do something with the database, I need to know something about the database. Again, maybe not a 2-year deep dive into how SQL was written. I just need to know enough about it to be dangerous so I don't sound completely ignorant in the interview. And when I get on the job, I could be as effective as possible on day one.
I think that's a good way to put it. What would you say to someone who, as they're like thinking about this, like, okay, I've got this job description, right? I'm interested in becoming, let's just keep using the example of backend developer at Stripe, and they use Go and they use Kubernetes and they use Docker and they use SQL and blah blah. And I'm like checking these boxes. What would you say to someone who's extremely unsure of whether or not they've actually checked the box, right? Because it's like, you can take a 5-hour course on Go. Does that check the box, right? Like, how do you think about, am I there yet?
Where there yet means what? Because there's different theirs.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I'm getting at is like, I can imagine, or I shouldn't say I can imagine. I have students who in their mind have this like kind of checkbox, right? Of like, I need to learn this, and then I need to learn this, and I need to learn this. But as we both know, learning something isn't like a binary thing. It's not like right. I know Golang or I don't know Golang.
Exactly.
Is there some sort of like self-assessment someone can do in general with tech skills that can give them an idea of whether or not they're even close to being at the point where they can start applying for those jobs?
Yeah, for me, I have like the most controversial answer to this. I know exactly what you mean now. And I very seldom say it because of how controversial it is. For me, it's a gut check. It's a gut check, meaning I'm not just looking at the list of languages and technologies in the stack. I'm looking at, for any job description, what do they want me to do? Because they don't want you to do Go, right? They don't want you to do Java, right? They want you to write microservices that organize the orchestration of millions of packages. When you read over a job description of what you're going to actually do, you should take a moment and just gut check, how comfortable do I feel like I can do that? Like today, could I pretty much do it? Is it completely out of my league? For me, the answer to that is it's a gut check, but it has to go beyond just like the list, because how much Go do you know? The whole 20%, like that's completely ignorant. Like you can never learn enough of the language. Nobody knows all of any language. You know enough to get the thing done. And so my answer to you, and I guess it's kind of a short, quick answer, but I'm not being flippant at all. This is exactly what I do. I make a real gut check, an honest assessment. How comfortable do I feel I could do what they're asking me to actually perform on a daily basis on day one? How close am I? Because the whole thing of like learning on the job, that's some 5-6 years ago talk. They have no need to do extensive learning on the job when there's so many people who are ready to start right now, doing everything on the list, 100% of everything on the list. So for me, it's a gut check. Look at what they're asking you to do, try to get a mental picture. And if possible, again, this is why you go to in-person things, right? I know Microsoft, we have a Microsoft office here, and they have like a C# or Azure meetup like monthly, which I never go to because I don't do C# or Azure. But if I had my eye on a Microsoft job, I would go just to talk to somebody about what the jobs are like. Before, when you're getting pizza and Coke, or afterwards, not necessarily the key speaker, just people that are around, because we all have the name tags. Right. My name is Lawrence, work at Backend. I see a Microsoft person, I'm introducing myself and just trying to find out what is it like. And as he or she is talking, I'm processing, could I do that? Like, could I really do that? And if not, how close am I? What am I missing?
Yeah.
Hey, they seem to go really, really heavy on the Microsoft stack. I've never touched the stack at all. I probably can learn C# because it's like Microsoft Java and I'm a Java guy, but I don't know what Azure is like. I'm more GCP and OCI. What's that difference? I need to make some assessment of how close am I, and then go for it if I'm interested, or find something else. But it's a gut check. On that one, I really go on feelings, which sounds so non-technical. I guess that's the other side of me. I am somewhat balanced person. I'm a tech guy and a family guy and a church guy. And like, we all have these different sides. So I'll let my heart come out on that part.
It's such a non-satisfying answer, but I do think it's the right one. And one thing that I tell people, and I'm interested to hear if you're on board with me on this, is if you're not sure, in most cases, definitely doesn't hurt to apply. Maybe you show up to the interview, you totally bomb it, but I just really want people to come out of interviews. Like, I hear this a lot. I did all these interviews and nobody was willing to give me feedback. I don't know about you, but I've been in a lot of interviews where I got rejected and I never actually felt like I needed the explicit feedback. It was like, I knew that I flubbed that question and I could write it down and like, I did not know enough about XYZ, right? Or I screwed this one up. And you can kind of get a really, you really get really good at self-assessing
Yep.
in interviews.
I 100% agree. So that's the other side. So we talked about the gut check. Now the interviews. How do I view interviews? Which is a separate question, by the way.
Hmm.
Every interview is a learning opportunity. Every interview. When you go into an interview, all right. So back-end developer at Stripe. Before the interview, you do not have that job. So regardless of what happens, there is no chance that you can lose the job because you never had the job in the beginning. So you walk into the interview as a learning process. I'm going to learn how well I perform, what they're looking for, how the match is, how the vibe is. I'm going to learn a lot of things if I'm paying attention because I've practiced, especially like in a behavioral interview sometimes. I've practiced those enough.
Yeah.
I can kind of be an uptime. I can be an observer of myself and them even while I'm answering. And so if it doesn't go very well, I'm noticing all the cues, direction it took, the conversation took, did they try to steer me somewhere and I missed it? I'm noticing all those things. And as soon as I go back to the car, again, in-person interviews, I'm writing all of it down. Same way, like we want to learn, remember your dreams. You have the notebook right by I believe in pencil and paper, by the way. You have the notebook right by your bed. When you wake up, you write it down. Do the same thing in interviews. As soon as you get out of an interview, grab that pen and paper and mark down all of what happened. Do that for every interview and you begin to get a body of, here's how I function in interviews and here's what happens. And you'll find trends and different things like that. And so from that perspective, you can always apply to anything. I don't even understand the question. When am I ready to apply? Whenever you want to. When are you able to click the button? There is no magic marker that says you should apply and you shouldn't. If it does exist, ignore it. Apply wherever you want because there's no guarantee. No one's guaranteed a job. There's nothing to lose. Like nothing but time and the investment of studying if it's a technical interview, but you don't have a job to lose. So go into it with a different mindset. I'm just going to apply wherever I want, whenever I want. If they call, I'm time to learn. If they don't, I'm on to the next one. Kind of an unemotional attachment to the interview process. I'm not this thing like I'm going to cross off, like you said, 6 check boxes. And at that point, I'm officially ready to apply to this kind of job and they're going to hire me. Lie. That doesn't exist for any of us. That state does not exist. So let's just throw that thinking out once and for all. Anybody can apply for whatever you want at any time. And if you get called, just start getting ready and prepare to learn something no matter what happens. I think that's a healthier approach for our mental.
Having a thick skin when it comes to rejection, like this biological avoidance that we have, right, towards rejection. Like we really don't like it. It makes us very uncomfortable.
Yep.
Not making the basketball team in high school, right? Getting rejected when you ask someone out on a date. Those things like hurt emotionally. And I think the default state of most people is if I don't apply, I can't get hurt.
Yep.
But if you can get over that, like if you can just, like you said, treat it like, a salesperson at a cold calling job treats their cold calls. If you can have that level of like, if I get rejected, I get rejected and we move on, that can be like a superpower because most people don't have that. I think most people are hesitant to show up to interviews where they're not quite as confident as they might otherwise be because of that fear of rejection.
Yeah, we're all pain avoidant, me included. And you're right that when you get yourself to but you see, you never get there if you don't try to get there, though. That's the thing. You won't become a person who walks into the fire unless you try walking into fire. But once you do it the first time, and it doesn't absolutely kill you and wipe you out, you have data now that maybe I can try it a second time. Then you do it 2 or 3 more times and you realize, hey, this doesn't just apply for applying for an interview and maybe I thought it was too high of a level and they actually called me. This can apply to the person I wanted to take out for a date or, some opportunity that comes up in my community. Like this can apply to a whole lot of things. And you begin to find out that there's some people who would just freaking go for it, knowing that it might work, it might not. And there's other people who just have to avoid that pain. Like I couldn't take it. I bet you can, but you have to give yourself a chance. The more times you go through it, the more times you realize it's not going to take you out. But you have to take that first step. And but we're all pain avoidant, and for good reason. And that's in our neurology, right? It's to keep us from danger and harm, right? Don't walk into the dark forest at midnight with no flashlight and no weapon. Like that's just a bad idea. But an interview is not a dark forest at midnight with no light, no weapon. It's just you and another person talking, and one of 2 things will happen. And if they say no, or if they say nothing at all, you have the freedom and the ability to keep moving forward.
I mean, I think you and I are both pretty aligned on this idea of like, especially if you're a self-taught developer, I would go so far as to say everyone, but especially if you're a self-taught developer, like building projects and deploying them is like you got to do it. Like, you got to do it. You got to put in the reps. You got to actually write software. It's definitely not enough just to watch videos, right, in order to learn to code. And just hearing you talking about interviews made me think, like, I think there's a lot to be said about there's some hard skills when it comes to interviewing, and even more specifically technical interviewing, that you can listen to these podcasts and they'll help, but like, you do have to actually go out and try interviewing so that you can see how you perform in real life, and then, iterate and make improvements. One of the things I'm thinking about is the thing that I struggled the most with when I first started interviewing was that I have a hesitation to just jump right in and start writing code. Like, I'm the kind of person in school that like would stop reading the instructions about halfway.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, stop reading the instructions halfway through and just start writing code, just start going. And it burned me. Like, I missed my chance on a lot of interviews early on because of that. And then I watched some videos that were talking about, how you should sit back and listen, right? How you should ask follow-up and clarifying questions, to the point where I actually got really good at that. And, my third and fourth jobs, I really felt like I did well in those interviews, but it was only because I was able to like put in those reps over and over again.
Absolutely. Yeah. I was actually on it wasn't a Twitter space, it was a Zoom for Queen Arit, the developer, her group. They have periodic meetings. I came in as a guest, as just a person just to listen, and ended up answering questions. I don't know how that happened, but long story short, someone was asking about, I think not the technical interview, but dealing with behavioral interviews and certain type of questions they do well, they don't do well in. I said, well, you're in a community of a bunch of fellow developers who are all in training, all working on that first job or so in tech. Why don't some of y'all just start pairing up? Hey, you need to work on sliding window problems. I need to work on just presenting myself better in the tell me about yourself, or tell me about a time you overcame conflict at work. And so why don't we just interview each other? Right, we'll just do it once a week, and then we'll switch up the team. So at least I get the practice of how do I come across. I'm going to have the camera on so I can see my facial features and my hand movements. Am I moving too much? And how do I sound? And then we can record it and play it back. And then we have feedback loops. Now we have the feedback loop, which is like scientific method, right? You have a theory about what you're going to do. You don't know if you're working out, so you go try something. Then you analyze the results and you iterate. That's all the science. You can use that for yourself. Scientific method for interviewing, right? I think I'll do okay on this. I won't do okay on that. I'll answer this way. I'll answer that way. Now let me go try it. Let me go get the reps in, which means I have to practice somewhere with someone. There's AI tools, there's automated tools, but I love just calling somebody on the phone and say, hey, can we do a mock interview tomorrow or next week, or when are you free? And you do one for me, I'll do one for you if you like. That's a great thing for people who are in all these Slacks and Discords and other groups to do. Pair up with people and get better in the things that you're not good in now through practice.
There's nothing worse than doing anything in a vacuum, like just by yourself with no feedback on how well you're performing. It would be like writing a full application without any tests, right? Without ever deploying it, without ever running it, right? Like, it doesn't work. You need that incremental feedback, ideally on as tight a loop as you can get.
I'm imagining a single violinist practicing for a symphony by themselves for months, then showing up with the entire orchestra for the first time on the night of the opening performance. No one would ever do that. It sounds
it's even worse. Imagine if they couldn't like hear their violin for some reason. Like, they're just playing, they're like doing the notes, loop. But like can't hear it. It's like,
this feels right. I think this is right. And then you show up and you're like a half a note out of tune, and your tempo's all wrong, and you missed that there was a crescendo here because you had no feedback. So yes, use people. Like, there's some decent humans out here. Connect with humans, practice together, learn together, build together, iterate, and go for it.
I have one last kind of big question. This will move us forward a little bit chronologically. This is for people that are kind of, they've landed a job. Maybe they're in their first job, right?
Sure.
And again, I'm pulling from the archive of Lawrence videos. But you have this video
stuff,
where
you that guy's unhinged.
I spent all morning. I'm steeped in Lawrence material.
I let my TikTok drop. I'm so disappointed. Somehow, and I'm going to get back to your question, but somehow I'm very singular focused when it comes to socials, because my original mentorship, believe it or not, was through Instagram. And I went from like 100 followers to like 2,000 in no time. I was just pumping out reels and stories back to back. And then I discovered TikTok. And it was like, ooh. And I started blowing up on TikTok and went from like, I don't know, the numbers. It was like really, really fast. I'm not huge, but big for an old guy. And then there was like Twitter started popping, like tech Twitter in particular. Like there was a lot of conversations happening and they weren't all that productive. I was like, oh, I can be the voice of reason. Gen X guy to the rescue. And so I went and I've let my TikTok just like fall off. So when I do lives now, there's like 3 people in my lives. My TikTok has fallen off. So thanks for reviving
Well,
it
I
and watching
enjoyed
those
it.
videos.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. I need
I
to
hit
get
you
back.
up with like 40 views today. It was good. Uh,
But back
okay,
to
so yeah. So this question, you presented this scenario where you're a junior developer in a company, and kind of down the hierarchy of the company, this kind of decree is passed. We're switching, right? We're switching from Angular to React, right? And at that point, you said you've basically only have 2 options, right? You can learn the thing, or you can get out. And I want you to talk us through first, like why those are the only 2 options, and then like how you should think about which of those 2 options you should take.
Yeah, but wait, that was a metaphor for something bigger, though. I thought you're making me trying to remember my own videos now. Yeah, that I definitely said that. I own up to it. Okay, guilty as charged. But I think that was a representation for some other idea. It wasn't so much about that. Crap.
I could be wrong, but I can kind of give you like my perception of the context, which is because this has definitely happened to me. It's like my boss comes and says, hey, we're switching from X technology to Y technology. And for whatever reason, I don't like that, right? Like I
Mhm.
preferred whatever we're doing at the time. It really could be any technical decision, right? I like
True.
Vue, I don't like React, or I like Go, I don't like Java.
Yeah.
And in my mind, the dichotomy you presented is exactly the right one, which is like, if you're trying to do what's best for your career and assuming that you don't have the power within the organization to actually make a shift, right? This is assuming that like, you're the junior developer, kind of the CTO has made this decision. You really don't have a chance of like changing their mind.
Mhm.
Then you either just need to mentally get on board with it and be like a positive contributor to the change and to the migration, or like, it's time to start looking for a job if you really like feel that strongly about it and want to work, with other technologies.
Right.
Because the only third option in my mind is like staying and kind of, I don't know, complaining all the time, like just being a downer
Well,
about
who
this
wants
thing that
that?
you're trying to deal with.
Yes. I guess what I'm processing right now is that is obvious, though. But I think I was using that to make some other point. Like that's very
The
obvious.
deeper point just went over Lane's head, like as I'm watching the
I don't
video.
remember
That's
my
so
head. I
unfortunate.
can't remember it, but that's always the option. There was something else I was
Yeah.
trying to drive home that you do have options in life, right? You do have options in life. You can do the thing or not do the thing, and sometimes, for whatever the example was, I was trying to drive home. We act like there's only one thing that you can do, like but your hand is never forced as much as you think it is. There are other options. Are you willing to live with the resulting actions of those other options is always the question, and kind of playing things out in your
Yeah.
mind. If I do this, what are the likely scenarios versus if I do B, what are the likely scenarios? You do have the power to choose both. You're not necessarily forced. But if you want certain scenarios to happen, they're typically going to be triggered by certain results on your end, like choosing to learn the freaking language. I might have been dealing with ageism the more I think about it, but I'm gonna have to find that video because I think it was good. But the way I'm describing it, it sounds ridiculous because that's obvious. Everybody knows that already. So I'm gonna have to find the video.
I enjoyed it, and maybe it's due to like specific personal experiences I've had. Have you
Gotcha.
ever heard of Jeff Bezos's? He has this saying, "Disagree and commit." Have you ever heard of this one?
Haven't heard of that one. I heard the one where he says every day is a new day one. That's the one that I like.
Okay,
Every
that,
day is
that's
a new day
that's.
one. Regardless of what success or failure you had, tomorrow is a new day one. Treat it like that.
I like that.
But I haven't
I
heard
like
yours.
that. This is
Tell me more.
this one's like in my mind was like very related to what you were talking about, which is like, okay, so for all the listeners, disagree and commit is this idea that like when a disagreement comes up professionally, you can hash it out, right? You can have this discussion where you try to come to what the better decision is, right? Maybe again, CTO comes and says, hey, we're switching from Java to Go. You don't like that, right? You can make that argument for why you think you shouldn't do that. But at some point, a decision needs to be made, right? And maybe you have the power to make that decision, right? Maybe you're in the position of leadership, maybe you're not. But after the decision is made, like at that point is where I was like, okay, this is what Lawrence is talking about. You either have to get on board, be positive, learn the thing, ship it, right? Be a positive contributor to whatever's happening. Or at that point, it's like, yeah, you could commit to getting a new job and like moving forward in that direction. The thing that like I've seen engineers do, and this is why I'd say maybe it's obvious, but like people do this, is like they'll just stay on the team and they'll just hang out and they will be a detractor and a downer and somebody that nobody wants to work with and just constantly complaining about the tools being used. And that's what I'd at least recommend against doing. I don't think you want to be kind of that person on the team.
Definitely not. Not only is it not good for the team, it's not good for you, right? It's just bad feelings after bad feelings, and life is too short for that. To go through life just miserable when there's options available. So yeah, totally agree with what I said.
I agree with myself.
I promise you, I'm going to go find that video and I'm going to find out what the deeper meaning was, if there was one. Maybe I'm just hallucinating, but if there was one, I will send it to you on Twitter. That is a promise.
Yeah, tweet it, and I'll
history of what the heck I was talking about on TikTok. Probably some random morning, just woke up, had my coffee, or didn't. Well, I'll make a TikTok this morning. Yes, that's my entire social media process. There's no plan, there's no schedule. It's just, what a debate. You know what? Let's start talking.
You tweet it at me, and I'll comment and retweet it.
YouTube does not support that. If you do that on YouTube, you will be trash. Which is why my new YouTube never grew. But TikTok, you can just be you anywhere. Bad lighting, mic, doesn't matter. Just start talking. Somebody will relate to it.
Awesome. I suck at TikTok, so that's probably good advice. Is there any? Well, first of all, thank you. We've been going for over an hour. I can't believe it. This has been such a good conversation.
It's you, man. You're good at this. I have a horrible conversationalist. You're good at this. No. And you've gotten the reps in. I didn't realize how many shows you had until just a couple of days ago. I was scrolling like, he's done a lot of shows. Because fun fact, I did copy all the descriptions of your shows, threw it into Gemini, and asked for some points of commonality. And one of the things it says is tends to focus on Go. So I was like, I've been set up. I'm a Java guy. I've been set up. That's Gemini.
I was debating. I was debating if we had to hash that out. I was like, I'll let that one go. We could just let that one go. Save it for another time. Go and OCaml are very overrepresented on this podcast.
Little sprinkles of Rust.
I don't even know how to write OCaml or Rust. I just, for some reason, am involved in those communities, and so here we are. But where can people find you? Like, I want, plug your places. I know you're very involved in the community, and where can people follow you?
The place I would love them to find me the most is in Code Connector. So we started off talking about James Quick. He was one of the, I don't know what his title was, but he was the person who helped represent that group. It is a nonprofit meetup group. It falls under the umbrella of the Memphis Technology Foundation, which is local meetups here, but we have people who join us from all over, especially since the pandemic and everything went online. We have a Slack community where there are people from all varieties of levels contributing and engaging in tech discussions every day for free. We have online meetups for free. Just sign up. They had one on UX/UI today, UI/UX design, just today. We have in-person meetups still here in Memphis. I am no longer an official manager, whatever. I'm more in an advisor capacity, but I do pop in and contribute from time to time. Codeconnector.io. That is the main place I would like them to connect me with. Everything beyond that is secondary. I would say my Twitter, Lawrence T Codes, my TikTok, Lawrence T Codes, everything, Instagram, Threads, YouTube is all Lawrence T Codes. But those are about me, and I think they'll find me eventually. But I want people to get the help they need and find the community they need. Code Connector has nothing to sell, no courses. Everything we recommend is going to either be low cost or free. Nice. But not low quality, but these are vetted resources. Yeah. Nobody has anything to sell. That's why I love them to find me. And certainly find me vis-a-vis my company. We're really, really proud of what we've put out. Our recent release, 24/4, I think it's a minor release, but it's really, really major. Got some cool things like our AI assistant built in there, and actually the ability to build front-end views with either Java or React, all in a single application, which is really, really neat. So I would love people to engage on our Vaadin Twitter channels and LinkedIn, because I post there too. But main thing, go to Code Connector. We would love to talk to you at any level. So people join, well, I'm a senior developer. I'm not trying to get into tech. Great. Help guide people in the right direction with no fluff and no 3-month miracle stories. But here's practical solutions to make your journey better. We're all volunteer based.
Amazing. Go follow Lawrence. Check out codeconnector.io.
Thanks, Lane.
Okay. Talk to you later, Lawrence.
Talk to you later. Thanks.